project area to order. It's August 13th, 2020 at 5 p.m. My name is Mark Fleischauer. I'm the village manager for the Village of Vernon Hills. Mayor Byrne, who would normally be sitting here, was unable to make it today and asked me if I would sit in his place as the village's representative. First order of business is roll call and introduction of the representatives. And as your organization is called, if you'd please give your name as well so we can copy it for the minutes. Roll call.
Vernon Hills Park District,
Here, Jeff Fugere, Executive Director.
Countryside Fire Protection District,
Chuck Smith, Fire Chief, Countryside Fire Protection District.
Cook Memorial Library,
David Archer, Director.
Libertyville Township, Village of Vernon Hills,
Mark Fleischauer, here.
Community Member,
Has not yet been selected.
College of Lake County,
Ken Gotch, Vice President for Business Services.
Libertyville High School, District 128,
Here, Dan Stanley. Yep.
Hawthorn Consolidated School District 73,
Leanne Taylor, I'm here.
Lake County.
Julie Simpson, Lake County Board, District 18.
Okay, we certainly have a quorum. The next item is a selection of the chairperson, and I would like to nominate I'm sorry, selection of the public member. And I would like to nominate Mr. Rich Shirillo. Rich has been a member of the community for over 20 years. I believe he has 4 children. Three, sorry, I gave you a little extra credit.
Oh.
All of them have been through District 73 schools and 128. Rich serves as, he has served as our public member on the 2 previous TIF districts. He's a retired deputy chief from the Round Lake Beach Police Department and is currently working for FEMA. Is there a second?
Second, Vernon Hills Park District.
There's a motion and a second. Roll call.
I would also like to nominate someone. Is that okay?
There's a motion on the table. There's a motion and a second.
Okay. Thank you.
Roll call, please.
Vernon Hills Park District,
Yes.
Countryside Fire Protection District,
Yes.
Cook Memorial Library,
Yes.
Libertyville Township, Village of Vernon Hills,
Yes.
College of Lake County, District,
Yes.
Libertyville High School, District
Yes.
128, Hawthorn Consolidated School District 73,
Yes.
Lake County.
No.
Motion carries. Congratulations. The next item on the agenda is selection of the chairperson.
I would like to make a motion, please. I'd like to nominate Julie Simpson from Lake County.
Second, Cook Memorial.
Motion and a second. Roll call.
Vernon Hills Park District,
No.
Countryside Fire Protection District,
Abstain. Oh, no, then I'll vote yes.
Cook Memorial Library,
Yes.
Libertyville Township, Village of Vernon Hills,
No.
College of Lake County,
Yes.
Libertyville High School,
Yeah.
Hawthorn Consolidated School District,
Yes.
Lake County.
Yes.
You want to switch?
That's up to you. I can do it from here, or I can go there.
Either way.
I'm okay here,
Okay.
if that's okay with the camera and everything. We'll be moving on to review of Joint Review Board procedures and duties.
I will be handling that. My name is James Ferrolo, FDR.
proposed ordinances approving the redevelopment project area and the redevelopment plan and project, and in particular, the eligibility report and the redevelopment plan and project that were mailed to each of the taxing districts. Pursuant to state statute, you must submit a written report or recommendation to the village in regard to the eligibility report, the proposed redevelopment project area for the village's Hawthorn Mall TIF district, and the redevelopment plan and project in relation thereto. The report will need to be approved by a majority vote of those members of the Joint Review Board present and voting. The written report is due within 30 days after the convening of your first meeting, which would be by September 14th, 2020. Your report will either approve or reject the proposal, and your decision should be based on whether or not the eligibility report, the proposed redevelopment project area, and the redevelopment plan and project for the village's Hawthorn Mall TIF district satisfy the plan requirements and the objectives of the TIF Act. Your role is very specific in that regard. A more detailed review of the eligibility report and the redevelopment plan and project will follow my remarks. If no report or recommendation is filed with the Vernon Hills Village Board within the 30-day period, the state statute creates a presumption that the Joint Review Board has approved the eligibility report, the proposed redevelopment project area, and the redevelopment plan and project for the village's Hawthorn Mall TIF district. The decision of the Joint Review Board is, pursuant to state statute, a non-binding decision and is therefore only a recommendation to the Vernon Hills Village Board. If the Joint Review Board recommends rejection of the matters before it, the village will have 30 days within which to address the reasons for said rejection and resubmit a revised redevelopment plan and project. During this period, village representatives must meet and confer with the Joint Review Board and attempt to resolve those issues set forth in the Joint Review Board's written report that led to the rejection of the proposed redevelopment project area for the Hawthorn Mall TIF district and redevelopment plan and project in relation thereto. In the event that the village and the Joint Review Board are unable to resolve these differences, or in the event that the resubmitted redevelopment plan and project is rejected by the Joint Review Board, the village may proceed with the approval of the redevelopment project area for the village's Hawthorn Mall TIF district and redevelopment plan and project in relation thereto, but only upon a 3/5 vote of the corporate authorities. Finally, after the Joint Review Board is done with the matters currently before it, you will continue to meet on an annual basis during the life of the village's Hawthorn Mall TIF district. Each time you meet, you will be reviewing the effectiveness and status of the redevelopment project area and the village's annual report relative to the village's Hawthorn Mall TIF district. If there are any questions, I would be happy to answer them, or we can hold them until the end. And if there are none, I will turn this back to the chair.
As there appears to be no questions, we will move on to item 6, which is the TIF plan and TIF eligibility criteria review.
Madam Chairperson, I'd like to introduce Bob Richlicki and Nina Coppola from Kane McKenna, who are the village's consultants and prepared the report.
Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Chairperson, if you're okay, we'll proceed.
Yes.
Our presentation is going to be 4 parts. First we're going to go over, put it in context, some of the reasons for the village's review of this area, and also tie that into strategic and fiscal planning, not only for the village, but also for the other taxing districts, given the importance of this property within the community and the wider area. Then we'll talk a little bit about how this area qualifies under the TIF Act, and then you've got copies of the TIF plan, and they've been on file for some time now, but we'll go over some of the highlights or summary of the plan. So from the get-go, I think everyone's familiar and has been over the last 5-10 years with the state of retail, not only in northern Illinois, but throughout most of the U.S. The Village's Comprehensive Plan, which was set up in 2012, indicates the importance of the corridor, the commercial corridor, of which this is part of. And in fact, over the years, both the village and the other taxing districts have benefited from the retail and retail sales along this corridor. Again, the market has shifted, the market has changed. In particular, where it's hit the hardest most recently has been in enclosed shopping malls and general merchandisers. Both the pressures of internet sales as well as the economy, and now exacerbated by COVID, has seen impacts both in terms of the longevity of long-term retailers. Carson's and Sears, for example, have closed within the Hawthorn Mall, and there's been closings throughout throughout northern Illinois and throughout the United States. So given the importance of this area, not only in terms of its location, but also its size, the village is taking a proactive role along with the review with ownership as it relates to repositioning this asset and allowing for the property to continue. It may look different in the future, but in order to continue to become an important contributor both in jobs and in taxes for the community. So, objectives that were set forth in the plan have to do with, again, maintaining value, stabilizing the asset, providing for redevelopment that would be consistent not only with the village's comprehensive plan, but again, be nimble enough in the market in order to react to some changes in the marketplace and be able to reposition the property, as I said earlier. The area in question, includes basically at Hawthorn Mall, but does exclude J.C. Penney's and also the Macy's stores, and there's a Carson's furniture store that is not included. So essentially the former Carson's footprint to Sears, 3 or 4 properties that are in the corner on the southeast part of the mall, and the inline part of the mall itself are included within the proposed TIF district. So from the standpoint of the TIF Act, there are certain factors that have to be met. There are certain thresholds. Obviously, we're greater than 1.5 acres. I think it's about 65 or so acres. We conform with the Village Comprehensive Plan as amended with respect to general land uses. We do meet the criteria for a conservation area, and we'll go over that in the next part of our presentation. And again, the village also makes the finding after discussions, numerous discussions with ownership as it relates to the need for TIF, the need for public assistance as it relates to repositioning the mall in today's marketplace. This is interesting. So from the standpoint of moving forward, the idea is, again, to reposition the mall, maintain its value or definitely increase its value, and make it consistent with what's happening in the market, which are uses that are different from what was originally the mall and a single-use purpose of many of the properties that are there right now. So the TIF designation, again, is in place to allow for that to happen. It's a commitment as it relates to the village board will review exactly what's being proposed. The TIF plan is not really, it's a plan, but it's not an entitlement plan. This process would move along with the village zoning and entitlement. The TIF is really more of a financing plan. It's in play to allow for additional piece to the village arsenal as it relates to the entitlement and zoning and permit process, and addresses some of the market imperfections that have been seen in order to move this project forward. Under Illinois law, we first identify the area. You all have seen the map. So there's a geographic boundary to the area in question for the TIF district. Secondly, you have to meet certain standards or criteria under TIF Act. And really the dividing line is improved or vacant, and this is an improved property. And there's another fork in a road. You could either be a conservation area or a blighted area. In this case, characteristics of the property as it relates to the age, most of these are mid-70s vintage. 5 out of the 6 buildings that are considered or 83% are over 35 years or older. So that then we pass that threshold factor, and then the next series of factors, there's 13 set out in the TIF Act, and you have to meet at least 3 out of the 13. Based on our site surveys, and Kay McKenna has probably been involved in over 400 of these TIF districts. In the last TIF district with the village right across the street, the Regency Melody Farms project. We've identified 6 factors out of the 13. There were obsolescence, deterioration, inadequate utilities, lack of community planning, 5, and excessive vacancies. And we're going to go over that in a little bit. There's a little more detail that's set forth in the eligibility report that's attached to the plan, but we'll give an overview at this time. Obsolescence is essentially the function, as defined under the TIF Act, of either being falling into disuse or being ill-suited for its original use. In particular, the review of the 2 anchor stores, the Carsons and the former Sears, were designed initially as special use anchors. They were of a footprint and a size that were specifically designed for large-scale retail. Since the closure of those chains, there has been no replacement users for a facility of that type. And again, in terms of the criterion since 2018 of falling in disuse, those properties have met that. There's a ripple effect throughout the rest of the inline mall stores as it relates to smaller stores who were signed long-term leases or medium-sized leases that were based on the operation of those anchors. Their rent, their foot traffic, the ability for them to get other users were dependent on the positioning as well as the opening of those stores. Well, that is not the case. We'll get into it a little later, and that's led to some ripple effects as it relates to ongoing vacancies or increased vacancies throughout the rest of the mall area. Deterioration, the TIF Act again is specific. It identifies, if it's site improvements, cracked pavement, potholes, if it's building components, doors, windows, condition of exterior improvements. We surveyed the area. Most of the deterioration was really found in the site improvements, the ring road, the drives, parking lots. Those were noted, put as part of a photographic exhibit, which we had, and were identified, and this was dispersed throughout the boundaries of the TIF area. In some certain cases, we found, again, in primary loading dock and parking area stairways, there was some deterioration present as well. But by far, most of the deterioration was in the site improvements. Inadequate utilities, this was done in conjunction with the village's Public Works Department and engineers. And again, as you get into any reuse potential or repositioning, remember that this area was designed since the 70s as an enclosed mall, as an enclosed retail facility, and the presence of the utilities, water, sewer, electric, gas, serve certain sites within the area. To the extent that those buildings are removed or repositioned, or reused, I should say, not repositioned, that would require relocation of utilities, which would currently be inadequate for future uses. There have to be capacity issues as it relates to both upsizing and the relocation of both water and sewer, and electrical and other utility services may also require such a relocation. For the excessive vacancies, again, the 2 obvious candidates are the Carsons and the Sears stores. They represent over 26% of the entire mall area, which is significant. Normally, vacancy for commercial properties, retail properties, the industry standards anywhere between 5 and 10% of gross. In this case alone, it's at 26% with the anchors. When you include the inline vacancies, that almost gets up to 40%. And again, and that is a little bit of a masking number because there are what they call month-to-month leases, where shorter-term leases are there. And I think you guys, or if you've been in the mall, you could see some of the stores or users that are the month-to-month leases. They're not regional, they're not national tenants. So lack of community planning, again, this one mainly goes to when the mall, originally the guts of the mall, the larger part, was originally built and designed, and that was before the first comprehensive plan in the village in '74. Again, in particular, the last 5 or 10 years in the marketplace have made some of those changes inadequate, so to speak, as it relates to both internal access and internal circulation, utility configuration. As newer uses are considered, and it's not all going to be retail. I mean, that's one of the things we're learning over the last few years. If you look at some of the repositioning, Northbrook Court, Lombard, Yorktown Mall, Spring Hill, Aurora, Fox Valley Mall, you're seeing mixed use that had entertainment, residential, little more, less department chains, department stores. Again, the mix is changing. So again, that's going to require different planning as it relates to circulation, access and egress, and buffering within the area. So that will have to be addressed. So again, in summary, conservation area, 50% or more of the buildings have to be 35 years old or greater. We're there, 83%. And 3 out of 13 factors, and we identified 5. And I just want to point out, too, each and every building or each and every structure doesn't have to meet all of the factors. It's really an area-wide criteria as it's been interpreted over the years. And it's important that the character of the area, in this case in particular, with the obsolescence, the vacancies, that the character is prevalent and has an impact on any redevelopment for the area as a whole. TIF plan, we're not going to get into dot every I, cross every T here. Again, we're willing to answer any questions you may have. And again, the TIF plan is more of a general document as it relates to conformance with statutory requirements as to, we have a legal description, yes, we have a budget, yes, we have a projected EAV and an estimate of frozen EAV. All those things are in there, plus village goals and
Before we
objectives.
continue,
Excuse
my
me?
apologies, before we continue,
Yeah.
since we've kind of finished the eligibility criteria, I wanted to open it up to the members and see if they had any questions before we get too far and have to go back. Do any members have any questions on any of the eligibility criteria? Well, I have a couple, so I'll start. Go ahead. So I had a question when we were talking about, the pavement, the potholes, the cracked driveways and those things. The current developers have had this for a while, and so they've just chosen not to repair them, so it's left as a qualification? I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
there's, as far as I know, and like I said, we've been doing this for a while, as to the reason for it is not as important as the presence of it. If the factor is present as it relates to the physical condition, that's how we really see it. We identify if that condition is there, and we note it, and it's part of the site review.
I mean, just from a personal opinion, I might disagree that the choice to leave it so it fits into this box
Oh,
is a choice and not a circumstance. But
I misinterpreted then. I mean, we just started on this with the village, I think, this year. Some of the repairs have been ongoing, or the damage, I should say, deterioration, has been ongoing. I am not aware of, let's say, management's decision to, let's say, let it go for purposes of qualification. If there was any deferred maintenance, I think it had to do more with cash flow than it did with, let's make this check the box for the TIF.
Okay,
I don't think that's the case.
okay, so just so I'm hearing this, so the only reason why none of these things have been fixed over the last several years is due to financial impact? That's what you're saying?
It could be. Again, I'm just speculating. I mean, we see this in other real estate assets. Usually if there's deferred maintenance, it's because of cash flow.
Okay, thank you. And then my other question was, when you're talking about the inadequate utilities for use, is that that's for the extra expansion? If there were something that were able to be developed to be more similar to what is there now, aside from 400 apartments, some of the utilities might be adequate?
No, what I've said is the TIF Act does allow you to go for both current and prospective uses. I think as prospective uses, including residential, there would be requirements for both relocation and upsizing, but I think there's also some condition issues currently as it relates to the size, or not the size, but the age of the water and sewer mains.
Can you be a little more expansive on what those current issues are for the current state rather
We-
than the
We'd
planned
have
state?
to, we'd have to get back to you on that. I don't have the information right in front of me.
Okay,
But, yeah, we could
absolutely, I
do that.
understand. Thank you.
Okay.
Do any other members have questions?
I just had a question on the vacancy in the stores of the, I believe it's Carson's and Sears. You talked about they've been vacant since 2018. Is there, in terms of a timeline, like that, the vacancy and how, like,
That's a good
For the
question.
qualification for the TIF, is there?
Yeah, when they're that big, and this is based on many years of discussions with retail brokers, 1 month is bad. When you've got something that is, and they're called an anchor for a reason.
Yes.
1 month is bad, a few years, and usually what you'll see is just as another kind of industry standard, your normal turnover is about 5 to 10% a year. This would be 26%,
Right.
2 years, not good.
Thank you.
Can I ask, this is, forgive me, is this the part where this is our chance to ask questions, or is there another spot? for us
Yes.
to- would that be what 8 is as well, or not? I just
Yeah.
want to make sure.
Yeah, so right now, for lack of jumbling everything together, since we just finished the TIF eligibility criteria, I was entertaining questions just on that alone.
Okay.
As a follow-up to my last question, in terms of the vacancy of those areas, did you inquire on the interest in leasing or those properties being utilized in another way?
Right now, the anchors, from what we understand, and the inline, it's a little more complicated because there's existing leases. Some have 5 years left, some have 10 years left. Some have what they call co-tenancy requirements, which complicate things because it could allow a tenant an early exit to the extent the anchors remain closed. But it's our understanding that the ownership has not been successful with respect to try to find reuse for those 200,000 or 150,000 foot anchors. And this is similar, by the way, experience that we had in Northbrook, experience that we've had in Aurora and in Yorktown, where they basically had to knock down the buildings.
So I would like to follow up to her question. So right now, you don't have an answer of what steps have been taken to attempt to lease those areas?
We just know generally that it's not happened yet. It's not been successful. If you wanted a chapter and verse, we would have to get more information from the ownership. But I'm basing this in part, again, on similar assignments that we've had, recent assignments we've had in both Northbrook and in Lombard as it related to the inability of ownership to find a reuse tenant for a special use building.
Okay, so I would appreciate a follow-up when you have the information of specifics on what you have tried to do
Sure.
to, thank you. Any other questions from the members?
I have one more in terms of, you mentioned Aurora, that's the same owners, correct?
Yes,
And-
Centennial.
And they're seeking a TIF as well?
Yeah, in fact, we're starting, next Tuesday, they're going to pass the resolution setting up a public hearing and a joint review board. Yeah.
I have one quick question.
Sure.
Bob, are you aware of any other stores or any other malls in the region where the large big box stores in the last 2 years have been released?
The answer is no. In Oak Brook, they tried it with the Sears building, but they had to cut it up into 3 pieces, and that was almost a 350, 400,000 foot building. Just an estimate. And it has not been successful. And it wasn't at one use. You cannot get, from what we understand, you cannot find these large users, Mark. And where Oak Brook, they did try to carve it up into 3. One of the uses, which was Sears, one of their basically closed, and there's only 2 left. And when we were working in Northbrook, Nina and I, my colleague, Brookfield, which was the owner, had indicated that they had tried for 18 months to find a replacement user, and they could not find a replacement user for Macy's.
So a follow-up to that, do you know what they did to find a replacement user?
Well, again, it's usually through the brokerage community. 95% of this work is done through the retail brokerage community. So there's a whole network. It's like a multiple listing service. You get the word out. Here's the characteristics of the asset, X square feet. This is how old it is. This is the kind of infrastructure that's there. These are the demographics. And that is typically what you'll see. It'll be like a multiple listing service for your house, except it's for other retailers nationwide. That's how it's typically handled. And that's usually the first thing they do. And if that doesn't work, then you go to Plan B or C. And I think we're at Plan B or C.
Okay, so just we think we're at Plan B or C, but we don't know for sure in what's been done so far.
We'll get back.
So look for a follow-up. Thank you. Any other questions?
You know what, I do have questions, but I don't know if like, this is my only chance to ask questions. They might fall under this category, but I don't really know. So should I ask now if it's related to this and you think?
Yeah, go ahead and
All right,
ask, and I
so
mean, we can
Chair,
go.
if you think if I'm in the wrong category, let me know. I had a question on the plan. The three buildings, the outbuildings, so the Denny's, the building with Uncle Julio's, and the
Yeah,
Qdoba.
right.
As part of that plan, like what, like just me kind of looking at the area, right? Because I've driven by it 1,000 times, you know, I think there's clearly something going on at the mall, right? So, but those three buildings, what thoughts behind them being in part of the TIF plan?
That's a good question as well. The reason is for prospectively, if uses will change and if we're going to reconfigure things within the interior of that envelope, from talking with the public works people, we may need those properties, because you got to spend the money within the TIF for either internal circulation or for traffic-related improvements that may be needed, and it was thought to be safe than sorry. We included those prospectively in the event that those improvements had to be funded through TIF.
Okay, so then what would be the reason for those properties? What's the I don't know, is there any specific problems with those properties? Like, I saw in the report it mentioned, I don't know if deterioration was the word, you
Yeah,
know?
we saw, yeah, there was still deterioration there, but remember what I said earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Each and every property doesn't have to meet the array of all the factors. It's primarily an area-wide designation, area-wide criteria, and what, you know, the box that you can check on those properties has to do with either the inadequate utility section as it relates to both traffic and possible relocation of utilities, and some deterioration as it relates to site improvements.
All right, because I mean, yeah, I don't know, but those were, because Uncle Julio's is pretty new, right?
Yeah,
You know?
and again, I don't want to beat that horse, but each and every building does not have to qualify. There's this area as it relates to the area-wide character of the improvements and the area-wide, again, the vision for the area. And that was brought in to tie in to either some possible circulation or traffic improvements that as the stuff to the north gets developed, you may have to fund that, and that's the reason they were included, if possible funding.
So including meaning was the plan that you might need to wipe out those buildings?
No, no, they didn't. The plan would be to either for traffic, whether some right-of-way or a ring road or some of the other improvements might have to change. You might have to get an easement or widen it a little differently or go underground. The idea is not to, now, as it relates to the department stores, that's a different story.
Yeah,
But,
yeah.
yeah, but to those,
So then why not have it go to the road right outside the properties? Because here's the thing, like, I'm just thinking in my head, like, Uncle Julio's been there, seems to be doing okay. Like, those
Yeah.
properties are going to hopefully continue to increase in value, and it doesn't sound like that those are having big changes. You know, that's, I think, my question for why those are included, other than
it's more,
they're going to increase in value and maybe there's more money now in the TIF fund.
relatively speaking, most of the value is really on the inline mall, and that's really where you want to stabilize or keep the value intact. And in there, you know, realistically, there's a lot of good retailers. The idea is to keep them there. Mm-hmm. And as for the 3 users or 4 users that are in that southeast, hopefully, again, they stay there, but we may need surrounding them may need some funding for other improvements, other either public improvements or right-of-way improvements.
All right, so then I have another question about, maybe it's the plan, and again, I don't know if this is the right spot,
Yeah.
but I saw your map of like, kind of, so, right, in my mind, I kind of think of the mall as like, it's the mall.
Yeah, but we excluded,
carved out.
yeah, we
Why?
excluded Macy's and J.C. Penney's. Part of the reason is they may they may go on their own as it relates to any redevelopment. And I think the village in early discussions with the taxing districts indicated that we're not going to push the envelope that far, that if it looked, they were not part of the Centennial footprint, so as a result, they would be considered separately, and they're not included in the TIF. Now, originally, I think those folks had wanted to have a wider, bigger envelope, but we decided, village decided to push back on that. And the only reason we went out to the south and to the east and included stuff which wasn't in the Centennial footprint had more to do with some discussions we had with Public Works and the idea that for future planning, we may have to do additional improvements. And if we're going to do additional improvements, well, it has to be within the TIF.
So it doesn't have anything to do with who owns it?
We're talking about for the Macy's and the Penney's, yeah, those are not owned by Centennial, but I think the idea was that they would be on a separate track.
Got it. Well,
would
because
be on a
like, I'm even
separate
thinking the
track.
parking lot, right? It doesn't seem
Yeah,
to
that
me
little
that-
piece that sticks out is a parking lot piece.
Yeah,
right.
but well, even just the, like, that the parking lot at Macy's is magically, it doesn't need to be part of the TIF, but the parking lot, like, just right next door would be, just in my mind, I don't,
Yeah,
I'm not really been part of conversation, so I'm
No,
just trying to
no.
wrap my head, it just
Yeah,
looks a little weird rather than just a circle,
that's, yeah, I hear you, but again, that's the way it was platted. And the idea was we're trying to follow the existing ownership's property lines, and that was one of them. That's
What
why
does
it
the
sticks
owner
out.
have, but in a TIF planning, like, what does the owner have to do with it?
No, it's not. This has more to do with the ability of who we're dealing with and potentially going to negotiate with. And we didn't have to get their, for example, if we did include the Macy's or the Penney's, you wouldn't have to get their permission, but you could include them. But I think the village made an accommodation, says we're going to keep the TIF a little smaller. If those guys go ahead, if they're going to go ahead on their own, or they may have, we may deal with different people, and we may have to make a different negotiation or deal with them. That's why they were excluded.
Okay. Thanks, sorry for the questions.
That's all right. No,
Thanks.
any question is good.
Any further members have questions? And please move on to the TIF plan.
Yeah, thank you. The budget is a 23-year budget. It's 85 million, but that's meant to be sized for a 23-year period, and obviously it's meant the way it's been, let's say, diagrammed is it's performance-based. This is premised on the fact that the property is repositioned, it does increase in value, and that increase would be utilized to fund that budget. I just also want to point out that of the TIF budget, the village does put in, whatever increment goes into the TIF, the village comes up with 10% contribution as it relates to what else goes into the TIF fund. The base CAV, and this is an estimate until it's confirmed by the Lake County Clerk's Office, is the 2019 EAV, which is 33,527,000 and some change. The projected EAV is obviously dependent on numerous factors, including the market and what would be redeveloped on the site over a certain time period. But the anticipation is there would be a more dense development. You would have newer uses. Many of these buildings, good news, bad news, the good news, they're still tax generators, they're still present, but they have been depreciated, over since the 70s. So the idea would be newer real estate would be in place that would also increase the value, additional density and additional value associated with the newer construction. Again, the budget, it's a 23-year budget. It's conditioned upon money coming into the TIF fund. The village administers this, as Jim Ferrallo indicated. You all are part of the annual review process. There's an independent audit that's done regarding the TIF fund, and as the cash comes in, The village has to account for it, utilize it only for TIF eligible expenses within that envelope. It's not for working capital. It's basically for primarily capital improvements and professional improvements that would be within the TIF district. There's also statutory school district payments. And again, there's a formula under the TIF Act that identifies for the grade school 27% of residential increment, 13% for the high school of residential increment. In the event that there's net new students that are generated as part of any residential development that receives a redevelopment agreement or benefits from infrastructure. So those amounts are, and that's an estimate. To the extent those amounts are greater, the village would have to shift amounts from the rest of the budget or amend the TIF budget in order to accommodate those costs. And that's paid out on an annual basis prior to the 23-year term being expired. So again, it's a 23-year budget. Village board, it's an estimate. The TIF Act requires us to disclose that to the districts as to what might be the cumulative or possible expenditures, but it is what it is. It is a budget, and it is for a 23-year period. So we're about halfway through the process. We've got the Joint Review Board notices to all the districts, notices to residential addresses within 750 feet have gone out. We still have notices to the taxpayers of record and any interested parties, and then 2 newspaper notices, and then we're going to be back here on October 6th. No action would be taken on that night. Village would digest any public comments, any taxing district comments, and have to wait a minimum of 14 days, but no more than 90 days to approve the ordinances designating that area that we saw on that first map. So thanks for your patience.
Are there any questions on the TIF plan from any of the members?
Yeah, I got a few, but if you don't mind. So I saw the 23 years. Why 23 years?
That's the statutory maximum.
Correct. So why 23 years?
Because at this point, without getting all the financing details, and our advice actually is, as we go through this with our clients is, if you don't have all the financing deals worked out, don't know about interest rates, what kind of term would be required to cash flow, at this juncture, you're best served by going with the maximum. The village always has the flexibility, and given the taxing districts are part of the annual process to monitor this thing as it goes forward. And to the extent that cash is not utilized, TIF revenues are not utilized, they obviously can be either used to declare surplus, make advance payments on any obligations, or end the TIF earlier. But at this point, without knowing all those variables, the idea is to identify not only the larger area, like we talked a little bit about, that stuff at the southeast, and as a contingency to keep it in for public improvements. But at this time, the idea is that the 23-year maximum is what we're going to need until some of these other variables get delineated.
So just so I understand, the way it works, right? So I've only been part of a few TIFs, right, in my career.
It sounds like you know a lot, though.
Well, I'm sorry, I just asked a lot of questions, and that's just me, so.
That too.
So essentially, it freezes at the 33 million or whatever it
Yes.
actually is.
Yes.
But as it appreciates in value, that additional value gets put into the TIF
That's
fund.
it. Yes.
If it depreciates in value, what happens? Like if it goes below 33 million, then what happens?
Our friends in the county are involved in that at tax extension. Unfortunately, if it decreases in value, you don't get the tax to the 33 million. You're only going to be able to tax whatever it is.
Okay.
So.
All right, and then the reason I asked for the 23 years is just seems like a long time, right?
It is.
Because I was thinking in my head, like,
It is a lot.
what that mall was 23 years ago, and I remember as a kid, forgive me for showing my age a little bit, but like that was the place to be, is that mall, and I just
That's
curious,
what we
like,
want.
right? But I feel like how do you know what it's going to actually be in 23 years?
That's going to depend. And again, the way, from what I understand, when the TIF Act was developed, they looked at two things. One, since it was primarily for real estate, what's the typical real estate funding or what's the typical real estate asset? Its useful life, it's 20 years. They added 3 years because they figured, well, you got to do a redevelopment agreement, you got to negotiate, you got to go through zoning. So they added 3 years. Believe it or not, I believe that's the logic behind the 23 years, and we're that's what we have.
And then I saw on your financial thing, right, I see the word school district, and I said, okay, that looks like me.
I think if you're the high school, yes.
Yeah, so what does that come from the residential part?
Yes, only from the residential. And for you, again, this is not us, it's a formula that's set out in the TIF Act. Up to 13% of that residential increment is available on an annual basis to the high school, 27% to the grade school, so for a total of 40%. And you have to make a requisition by September 30th every year, where you would identify the school-age children that are within your district added on as a result of and live in the project. And, the way the TIF Act was set up, they still haven't caught up. It was the per capita tuition charge. Now, I guess with evidence-based funding, do you still have the per capita tuition charge?
Yeah.
So it's the per capita tuition charge times the new kids. And that calculation is made by the village annually, and if you're under 13%, you're only going to get the kids times the per capita.
Yeah. So that was another question is, I don't know how that process works, right? So you're saying September 30th?
You have to submit a voucher.
To the
That's up to
village?
you. That's up to the village of Vernon
Well,
Hills. Yeah.
So you submit a voucher to the village September 30th for the kids that showed up that school year, or is it like last school year? It's like a year in arrears or something?
I've seen it done. I've seen it done both ways, and it's really depending on your protocol and your budgeting.
Okay.
The TIF Act was never that specific.
Okay. How many kids do you think, how many units or how many kids are you anticipating?
Didn't we, there was some prospective work done. I mean, depending on planning, everything's in phases. It could be anywhere from 300 units on the bottom to maybe 500 on the top. But again, it's dependent on the market. And our experience has been, and I don't know what you guys have seen, but, this is not your typical neighborhood. In terms of the rents are going to be just like across the street at the upper end. And these are not really family units. They're going to be smaller. The trend for the last 5 years has been smaller and smaller units, but the rents aren't that small. And you really offer amenities to folks who are looking to change their lifestyle. They don't want to own property. What they want are the amenities. Here you would have, hopefully after COVID, more of a nightlife thing, restaurants, that kind of stuff. So, it hasn't drilled down exactly yet, but that's kind of the outside parameters.
I have a question. You had said up to 27% for the elementary school and up to 13% for the high school. Who dictates what's that up to? So it's saying up to, but could that potentially mean zero?
No, it's based on how many kids. If you don't have any kids, it is zero. If you have 10 kids, if 10 kids take up 15% of the 27, then you're eligible for 15% out of the 27.
And so this is less of a concern to me, with what you explained of how these are going to look like. But by chance, let's say it brings 50 students and that's 35%, then the district is responsible for educating the students without any funds?
Under the current TIF Act, that's how it stands.
And I think I heard you say this, but students could be here before there's money to educate them. Usually it's a year or two in arrears?
Again, given that timing on that September 30th, that could be a possibility.
Thank you. Any other comments from members? Questions? So,
I do have one, Julie.
oh, sure, Chuck.
Would there ever be a time if we went 23 years for this TIF, is there ever an opportunity that it could be completed or finished sooner than the 23-year term?
There's all,
And how would that happen?
Okay, the only way that would happen is if let's say the village had an obligation, I'm just picking a number out of the air, $10 million. And if it turned out that the $10 million was paid off in 15 years and there were no other additional costs, and remember, the districts see the report every year. You know, the village has to predict or project what their costs are, where the money's going to be spent. You just can't park it. You have to identify obligations. To the extent that you all mutually agree or you point out, wait a minute, it looks like your work is done, there's a good case to be made. Again, it's up to the village. This is a village TIF, but there's a case to be made that maybe let's turn this thing down. Let's turn it off. And it's happened in some cases. I think Deerfield, when they did that downtown TIF, it wasn't much, but they did. They closed it in 20 years rather than 23. So, you know, it's been done before.
And you mentioned a surplus. Is that like an annual thing, or is that at the end of the TIF?
Surplus could be at the end of the TIF or every year.
What's the plan for, what's in the plan for this?
Well, again, it's a legal responsibility the village has, but right now, again, given that we have so many financial variables that haven't been identified yet, there is no firm amount or firm number that was associated with it. The village has the discretion every year, and upon consultation with the districts at the Joint Review Board, to visit that. But right now, the plan is silent on that. That's a discretionary action by the village annually.
So, other than Deerfield, are you familiar, or is there any frequency to which these TIFs do finish early?
Round Lake Beach, not too far from here, TIF number 3 ended in 15 years.
But no other ones that you are aware of?
Well, you got me in a tough spot here. I mean,
You can
I
send
can't,
it.
I'll look into that for you, but right now,
Yeah, you can send that
I'm
to me
so
later.
focused on this, my
Yeah.
memory's like, oh, no, wait.
You can send that to me later too, because I'm
Yeah.
actually interested to see.
Yeah,
If
we'll
we're at
do.
a number of 2, to see how many have gone countywide that didn't. end
Yeah,
up.
I mean,
So,
it's not I'll be honest with you, it's not like an overwhelming amount, but there have been some.
Thank you. Any other questions from members?
I have one more. Does the village plan to issue bonds for the TIF, or will it be a pay-as-you-go TIF?
The anticipation, here's the guy right in front of me, in our advice has been pay as you go.
Okay, thank you.
And so I think that we can move on to review of the, to item number 7, review of the draft TIF ordinances.
We have 3 ordinances we're going to pass out to all the JRB members, and we don't have to spend a great deal of time on this now. The 3 ordinances are an ordinance approving tax increment redevelopment plan, the redevelopment project for the Hawthorn Mall, an ordinance designating the Hawthorn Mall redevelopment project area of the village as a redevelopment project area pursuant to the TIF Act, and the 3rd ordinance is an ordinance adopting tax increment allocation financing. These 3 ordinances are the ordinances that the village board ultimately will have to adopt following a lot of things that have to happen. This would follow the JRB work. Your work would have to be completed. You've got, as I discussed earlier, the 30 days to reach a recommendation. The village board then, if they were to move forward, would hold a public hearing, which right now is slated for October 6th, in which further testimony and comments would be taken. Ultimately, once that's concluded, the village then would have to adopt these 3 ordinances that we've given to you in order to implement TIF financing for the Hawthorn Mall area. The ordinances are statutory. They're basically, when we get to that point of the process, formalities to be adopted and filed with the county. So there really is not a lot of meat to go through on those that Bob hasn't covered in the TIF plan. These ordinances identify legal descriptions, boundary maps, PIN numbers, and are the hit all the highlights that have to be met in order to establish a TIF. So I can answer questions, but right now these are drafts. They would not be adopted until, if all things go according to plan, the end of October, when the board finally completes its public hearing. But again, the work of the JRB has to be completed before we even get into consideration of these documents.
So I'll ask the members if they have any questions. I don't know if everybody wants to take the time to go through each one of these. seeing that there is no action and really nothing that we're going to do with them at this time. And if it pleases the board, I would move on. Looks like we've got consensus.
Fine.
So we're moving on to item 8, public questions and comments. And so I'm going to ask if there's any of members of the public who would like to ask comments or would like to make comments or ask questions. Please state your name and address for the record when you get to the podium, please. Yeah, girl.
Good evening, Carl Borchers, 270 Danbury Drive, Vernon Hills. I just wanted to understand a little bit more the timing in relation to informing the public for when these materials are considered final. I was reviewing the information on the village website, and I saw a reference at one point to the 45 days that the information's available to the public to digest. I know that there's a tentative schedule for this public hearing on October 6th, and we obviously have materials that you guys are looking at right now. But is there, I just want to understand procedure. Is it that you guys need to approve that material and then there's 45 days for the public to see it before action can be taken on it? If somebody has knowledge that can kind of outline that process, I just would want to understand that. Thank you.
Village Manager Fleischauer, would you like to respond?
Right now, the plan is a draft. The plan was prior to July 21st, I think, around that time, the village indicated that the plan was available for review. It's since been posted. All the taxing districts have received it, and it's still a draft. It's going to be a draft all the way up until the public hearing, which is on October 6th. At October 6th, if there's any changes made to the plan, the way it works under the statute, so you pretty much have the plan in front of you in terms of the 85 million, the boundaries. If either the Joint Review Board or the board considers public comment as it relates to the boundaries, we would have to go back and restart this thing. If the boundaries change or the budget change, any of the land uses that are general land uses that are set forth in the plan, if that stuff changes, you've got to basically recalibrate. I don't know if that helps you. Did I answer your question?
Which authority can change the plan at this point?
It's the board, the village board, yes. I mean, they could take the village board, right. The Joint Review Board can make suggestions as it relates to any of these elements, but ultimately, the village board, does the designation and finalizes this draft, sometime in October or thereabouts. Does that answer?
Yeah, but I'll come up to make sure it's on record and I can just walk through logistics to make sure I comprehend this. So, this board has 30 days now, clock started, to review the materials at hand that are draft, but are
Yes.
drafted at the support of the village board.
Yes.
So that's, if you look at it this way, that's what the village board's intention is. We want, from a village board perspective, this plan. No problem. Don't mind, we're taking this off for a moment. So what I was saying is that the plan that we're looking at today, although considered draft, is the one that the village board has put support behind. And now this board has up to 30 days to review that and to publish recommendations to the village board, either in support, rejection, or modifications. It's then
correct.
Okay, so then it's at the term of the village board to say, okay, we want to make some changes based on your input. Then the clock would reset essentially, that it would be a new draft, 45 days required for public
Yes.
availability, board reviews, like it kind of goes through
We're
that.
on the same page.
But if the board says, thanks but no thanks, this is what we're doing, then that 45 days for public review has been in existence. This
Yes.
board has exhausted its 30 days. You move to public hearing, and then you have the 14 to 90-day window where post-public hearing, the board has to take action on the document.
That is correct.
Okay,
You got it.
thank you.
Are there any other members of the public who wish to ask questions or make comments? Seeing none, we can move on to number 9, which is consideration of a resolution. But before we do, I want to make a couple of comments and just share a little bit of where I'm at. So as we're here, there's been a lot of questions asked, and some of us are waiting for feedback. In preparing for this meeting, I just want to share a little bit of how the timeline has worked out. On July 28th, the county received a packet. It was addressed to Board Member Craig Taylor, who is in Lake Zurich. And so it wasn't addressed to me or the county board chair. So by the time it got through everything, it arrived to me on August 8th. I was not able to bring this to committee, and Village Manager Fleischauer had called to even inquire if I had authority to vote and make a recommendation on my own. And to clarify how the procedure works, the county board chair designates someone to have that authority. That's always how it worked, but there really isn't a policy or procedure. And so at this point, out of abundance of caution, the county board chair has only authorized me to either request an extension so all these materials can be looked over further and put through committee, or just simply vote no. I don't even have the option to vote yes, just because of the concerns of my authority were brought up. And so that's where I am at this point. And I don't know if anybody else feels they had adequate time to entertain their boards and get recommendations or review the material.
I would also like to add on that I would like to make a motion to continue, for continuance, if I have similar thoughts in terms of the timeline and needing some more information. But I'll make a formal motion when asked.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Can we get a roll call, please?
I'm sorry. I make a motion that we move the,
31 days?
for 2 weeks, that we extend the continuance and we meet again, this joint review board meet again in 2 weeks, so that our district asked the village again just yesterday because of the timeline for some documentation, and we know they haven't had a time to respond yet. So we'd like a chance to review those documents and for the village to give those to review, so we would like a 2 weeks extension.
And I'll just add to that that timeline, I believe we have a finance committee meeting. We will not have a board meeting again until September, but I do believe that getting a consensus from the finance committee, I think would suffice everybody, or us to create a new policy which clarifies the authority, or the county board chair has the understanding of all this is going on here and is willing to make a recommendation of her own. And so I would like to ask any of the members if they have any comments on the motion.
I have a comment.
Who's still
So,
second?
just for the record, I received the packet on July 19th. So I have had plenty of time to review the document. I've had time to address it with our board, and personally don't see the need for the extension. We are in a position to support advancing it at this time.
Yeah, and I appreciate that you did receive the materials on the 19th. I know that that Lake County did not.
But I'll support, you know, if the consensus of the group is to advance it 2 weeks, I'll support that. But for the record, we've had the document for close to a month and have had time to review it as an agency.
Yeah, and I
discuss it
appreciate
with
that,
our
and
board.
I'm very glad you did. And
Yeah.
like I said, I don't know if some of it was the oversight of sending it to the incorrect member. I'm not really sure. But the first time I'd seen the materials were August 8th. So do any other members have comments?
Madam Chair, once you get that, I've got a suggestion that I'd
Sure.
like to make. I'm wondering if the movement might consider adding a date and time
August,
for the motion. I'm
Yeah,
sorry,
we
for the
did.
next meeting.
Yeah,
So
she did,
record
August
clerk.
26th, and could we do 5 p.m.?
Does that work with all the members?
How about, would it work better for the group if we made the meeting like at noon or 1 o'clock in the afternoon? Working everyone's schedules better?
We do have the Finance Committee on that Thursday at 9 a.m., and sometimes they can be very lengthy. I would be comfortable with like a 2 or 3 o'clock if that works for everybody else to move it earlier. 5 o'clock is also fine, just the morning is not ideal.
Actually, the 26th is a Wednesday. I'm sorry. So if we wanted to do the Thursday, that would be the 27th. I apologize.
The 27th would be
2 weeks from
my
today.
recommendation after I'm able to meet with Finance.
Is that the same day as your budget hearings, your Finance Committee hearings, 27th?
Oh, it's just a regular Finance Committee, yes.
Okay.
You can do it earlier in the day. I have a park board meeting that evening on the 27th and wouldn't be able to attend at 5 o'clock.
Would 2 o'clock work, Jeff?
That would be great.
Yeah.
And the suggestion would be, do we need to meet live? Can we set it up just through a Zoom meeting, and does it
I would
have to be in a
prefer this
live
was-
setting?
I would have preferred this was a Zoom meeting, but this was what we were offered. I am certainly able to recommend the pleasure of the committee.
Zoom meeting is fine with me.
Me too.
Is anybody opposed to a Zoom meeting? Okay, so just to repeat the motion, we are moving to postpone and have another meeting at August 27th at 2 p.m. via Zoom, and that should be in compliance with the governor's order.
I'll second that.
Can I get a roll call, please?
Aye.
Yes.
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 Yes. Motion passes unanimously. So I am going to assume that we can skip the review of timetable and next steps since we have another meeting. And I declare us adjourned unless any members have comments.
I'll make the motion to adjourn.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion approved.